Thank you, Kerry, for inviting me to moderate this panel. It's an honour. I have met some of these panelists on panels before. Imran, I'm looking at you. And we're going to look at this is about what's new and what's changing in the market. I'm interested to hear from these esteemed colleagues what they're seeing that's different and how that's changing the things that we all have to do in contracting when technology is such an important force in the deals that are getting done. So I'm going to start by inviting you to share with us some examples of the kind of problems that organisations are looking to resolve using technology, either embedded within services or on its own, that might not have been the case previously. So look back, those dim and distant days when we didn't used to talk about AI every day. What are the challenges and opportunities that people are solving using technology now that they didn't used to?
Hi, everyone. I'm actually not going to answer your question. I'm really sorry to start off this panel in a really naughty way. Apologies. I think it's the same challenges that we've always faced. It's issues around adoption, around reticence of businesses. So one of the things that we're dealing with at the moment is trying to convince the business unit to listen to their lawyers. What a shock. And it's difficult because we're looking at it from a risk perspective. We're looking at the technology that they're seeking to implement. And there are some significant risk factors there. It's a great tool. I won't name names, but it's a great tool. It is seeking to solve the problem that they have. So, in terms of a marriage, this is so far so good. But actually what we're seeing is there's some significant risk factors within the operational works of the business that need to change in order to really get the best use out of this tool. So getting the business to address those operational factors and operational risks, to be able to get the best use out of the tool, to get the best use out of the technology that they are paying a significant sum of money for, is the main issue. So I guess it's a behavioural issue more than anything. But I'm sure you can all look to perhaps yourselves in a quiet moment of reflection, or indeed some of your colleagues, and say, do you know what? We've all been there before, and we've all been trying to get folks on board with a particular use case or a particular way of working, whatever that is. But that's actually the biggest problem that we're facing at the moment. Not a new one, but certainly one that if anyone's got any suggestions on how to corral some of their business units, I'm all ears.
Great.
Thank you. So the question was around originally, what problems are we solving with technology now that we weren't before? Okay. So for me, the key one that I'm an avid user of Claude, and I use it largely for summarizing things. I found it's hugely helpful there. Things where I know there's 4 documents, I know the key 3 points, so I make a note of those, and I ask Claude to run a summary with some very refined prompts, and I say, have another go, but focus on this. And when I get back then, gives me the tier 2 and tier 3 data, which would have just been a pain to go through and find and directly quote, etc. And I know the key points on my list, so I make sure those are all there. So the main things are definitely there. And then I go through and validate every other item that's in there in the documents, because it gives me clause references, which saves me time. So I can go through and say, yes, it does indeed say that, there's no hallucination. But that is a huge time saver for me. And that's my kind of preferred use case at the minute.
The dangers of sitting last. Yes, I would agree with what's said, and I'm absolutely on board with your kind of view that comparison is just such a vastly improved job when you use AI. It's done much more quickly, efficiently, and what does that bring us? Ultimately, that brings us quicker delivery for our clients and potentially some more cost-effective delivery for our clients. And I think our clients as well is probably worth reflecting upon what they want to achieve, because ultimately we are there for our clients, and we're there to partner with our clients' businesses. And I think what we're seeing at the moment is AI being just an accelerator for a trend that's been going for quite some time, to kind of do a little bit of a remap of the tectonic plates of who does what. Like, do you need to go to a city law firm to do this task anymore? Or can I actually insource it myself? Can I take on the right tool, have the right processes, the right quality management around it, so that I get a good enough job for the task that I need to do, good enough to manage the risk to my level of satisfaction? And those are active conversations that we're having with our clients at the moment. And we're not shying away from them either, because I think there's, quite frankly, work that we don't want to do sometimes because it isn't efficient for us to do it. But because we're there for our clients and we don't want to turn our clients away, we kind of have to do that work. And so we're not actually worried about seeing some of that remapping going on, because it's a mutually beneficial exercise if you do it right and you do it in partnership.
Great. And if you look more broadly, so looking beyond the actual legal work to the other services that people might be procuring, whether that's in IT or whether that's in business processes and other areas, what we're seeing in ISG is there's acceleration in some parts of the market. So BPS is certainly accelerating. And people are looking at their outsourcing agreements in a different way and reallocating work and the way that work gets done. What are you seeing in the deals that you're being asked to advise, both in terms of insourcing, repatriation, outsourcing, and increasingly midterm renegotiation? What are you seeing in that work? And I'm going to go straight back to you, Imran, just because of the eye contact.
So what do we see? I mean, to some extent, we've started to cover it in some of the sessions that we've already had. When we're doing the big kind of strategic outsourcing deals at the moment, we kind of need to think about two things. What's the known use cases for deployment around AI? And what flexibility are we going to build into the contract to actually make sure that we aren't depriving ourselves of the benefits that AI can bring as it continues to improve, as it continues to deliver greater and greater efficiencies within the ecosystem? And some of that's about approvals, some of that's about how we partner together with the supplier and the customer community, and how do we play that through a contract. I actually kind of hate the word gain share, but there is no better word for it that I've really got. It's about having a sensible conversation about how you share the benefits of that, and not being inflexible as a customer organization to looking at your workflows and being a little bit agile about them. I think the other thing that we are spending a lot of time pondering, whether it's through the contract negotiations, whether it's ourselves as a law firm, or whether it's in the course of the negotiations with the supplier, is how do we get the calibration right of maintaining a right level of expertise within the business to supervise these tools whilst harnessing the benefits? Go back to a law firm example. How do we displace boring, repetitive tasks that sharpen the mind of young legal lawyers and make them hone their skills in a way that needs to be done? And I was talking at a university recently, and one of the things they do in their courses is they mandate the use of AI for legal research tasks. And so we're starting to get an influx of AI natives coming into our organisation, and I think every ecosystem is going to be finding the same things. As the young talent comes in, they're going to have a different set of skills, and so those that are senior, that don't necessarily have them naturally, are going to think, how do they ingest those skills into the business and make sure that it's responsibly wrapped around the tooling.
Great. And that kind of changing profile of the people that are doing the work, how do you, as a tool provider and an organisation that is equipping those guys with what they need to face the future, how are you keeping pace with that? How do you access those young minds to build into the toolkit that you guys are creating?
I don't know if I necessarily can give a perspective on that per se, but I do think one of the key things is, and it picks up on a point you just made, which is that the traditional model, certainly in any organisation, I pick law firm, but any organisation, is that senior people train more junior. And I think what's happening now is that's flipping on its head a bit. Quite often you're getting people who are at the sort of peak of their career in terms of seniority, and you're having someone straight out of law school saying, hey, I can do that for you in 5 minutes, and here you go. And the sort of senior person who would ordinarily and typically be schooling the younger is saying, wow, teach me how to do that. So I think that is quite an interesting dynamic, because now you are getting people who can really turbocharge their careers at a junior level by embracing technology and being able to embrace technology much better than perhaps people who have got a very set way of doing things might struggle with. So that's what I've noticed, is a definite change in sort of culture, and that I think it's positive, because I think when decision making is centered around a particular demographic, I think it creates a culture that isn't necessarily as vibrant, responsive and fun as it can be when you've got that kind of opportunity more kind of democratized and sort of spread around the organization, and seeing the energy that some of the younger people joining organizations bring and their enthusiasm to get there is I think, a great thing for business, personally.
Great. And Megan, you touched on the behavioural things, and this is about people. I'd be interested to find out more about what you see is required in terms of changing the way that we do equip our young people with the tools, but also the changes of behaviour, support them, provide leadership through that process.
Thank you. I mean, David, you just defined or described every law firm ever, where decision making is very much kept at that sort of very senior level. Eleanor, to answer your question specifically, it's actually really challenging being a senior partner in a law firm where you're supposed to have the answers. You're supposed to know how to run things. Everyone's supposed to look to you to be able to not only, train up the junior lawyers to become the partners of tomorrow, but also how to run your own business as well and to run it well. So actually sitting there in a room being, frankly, schooled by our trainees in some instances is incredibly humbling. But, you need to stay curious. We have to stay curious. And if you don't retain that curiosity within yourself, within the organisation, with looking to where you're going to learn from and who you're going to learn from, you're in trouble, right? But I think where we can share that learning is risk and governance. So making sure that, we are using the tools, but we're using them responsibly. We are using the tools, but we're making sure that those checks and balances are in play to make sure that for our clients and for each other, we're getting the answers and they are accurate, they are material, they are helpful, they are substantive. They're not the ones that you're going, oh, this is great, but this isn't useful to me. So in terms of actually coming back to relationships, being able to understand your client and know what they need, that's where that sort of collaboration across the generations, I'm getting to sound very old now, but the collaboration across the generations can really come to the fore.
Great. And in any kind of transaction, it's not just about you, not just about the lawyers. Generally, there's a client team. I know it's a shock. But the client team will have different knowledge. So they might know more in some areas, they probably know less in some areas. Equally, the providers come to that process with their own set of knowledge. How do you make sure that the rising tide of knowledge floats all three of those boats as you go through a transaction?
That's such a good question. I think it comes back down to another C word, collaboration, and being able to have that from the get-go. So engaging with your client early, engaging with their other providers and their other suppliers early, and not being afraid to turn around to a fellow provider or even a competitor and say, we don't have the answers here, but do you know what, working through organizations like we're doing today, through networks, through client relationships, and then these kind of conversations, to be able to then work that collaboration going forward.
Great. And David?
I think it's that, and I think it's also around a culture of not being afraid of sharing things that have gone wrong. I think that's really, really key for me when embracing anything new. Technology as an example, obviously, but anything. I think the businesses that have done well, I'm thinking like Amazon, I'm ex-Amazon, so I kind of go there quite quickly, is that there's a real entrepreneurial mindset of fail fast, fail quickly, tell everyone about it and move on. And I think that mindset through AI and adoption of disruptive technologies is becoming more pervasive, which I think can only be a good thing.
Thank you. And I think the one thing I would add is, it might sound obvious, but make sure the right people talk to each other. You're doing a contract, it's very tempting just to have, procurement, buy lead, sales lead, and not actually bring the people that are going to be delivering the tools into the conversation. And that's a really important part of it. And if I was to draw on our own experience at some of the client relationship engagement that we have, so this is beyond matter delivery, this is beyond kind of doing a specific mandate. It's how do we speak to our clients who are themselves as big as some law firms when you look at the amount of lawyers that they've got internally. So they face many of the same challenges. It's actually not me that's doing some of the talking to them. We've got our chief data scientist talking to them. We've got our technology advisors talking to them. To David's point, helping them understand where we've done things well, and then they can benefit from that. But where we've done things that actually have proved to be a dead end, or that we could have rethought the way that we've done that. And that's an invaluable part of cementing the relationship with our clients, we found.
Great. And what's your top tip for contracting for collaboration? Because I think this is quite an interesting topic, and I don't mind who takes that. I'm going to leave it up to you.
Shall I have a first pass? I mean, there isn't a single clause for it, right? It's embodying all the principles that we've just sat and talked about. There's always a temptation to say, well, we'll sign the agreement, then we'll put it in the drawer and we'll forget about it. Well, you'll want to do that if your contract doesn't support those conversations. So the conversations should be, what innovation forums have you generated? They shouldn't just be a line in the contract. You should do them. If you've put like an innovation fund together, use it for the right things. And what that requires is just the spirit of partnership. So it's not just about what the contract says, it's about how you use it. Pick it up and use it. And if you're a customer and you've said, I'm going to have an innovation fund, and we're going to have an innovation forum, and we're going to look at how we can deploy these new tools and share in the benefit, then don't be closed-minded to those conversations when they actually come. Yeah. Otherwise, people will stop doing it.
And just probably picking up on a point you made, I think one of the key things is making sure in the contract that you actually have mandatory attendance at those meetings, because I think there are a few things more embarrassing than sitting down with a key customer contact when you've got a meeting scheduled and it's an hour long, you're going to talk about all the great ideas you've got, and you turn up with a blank sheet of paper and start talking about the football. I mean, you might get through the first 10 minutes of that meeting, but it's not going to go well for you thereafter. So I think just setting up those placeholders that would, by not doing anything, they become incredibly awkward. And that becomes a good forcing function, I think, to make sure those conversations are actually had.
I agree with everything that's been said. I'm going to sound like an anti-lawyer for the moment, but I think it just comes down to your relationship with your providers and the providers in the room, your relationship with your clients. Driving the right behaviours, getting involved early and having early conversations and having those touch points, not just necessarily those monthly meetings that, us lawyers put in the contract in the governance schedule and you think, oh yes, good idea, let's do that. It's not like we'll make the contract say whatever you need it to say. It needs to reflect reality. And so if you're not in reality going to be having these kind of conversations, if you're not in reality prepared to turn up at your client's door, your customer's door, or your supplier's door and say, hey, we need to chat about this, or can we go down the pub and have a quick drink, or, we need to have a coffee every Wednesday. If you're not going to be prepared to invest that time, whether that time is in a social setting or indeed in workshops or, how you problem solve or in terms of the early stages of that behavior collaboration setting, you're not going to get to a good point. You're not going to have the longevity in that relationship that's ultimately going to be that, to use a very old phrase, that mutually beneficial relationship that we were all searching for back in some time ago. But I think that's ultimately the answer. It's behavior and early, honest, open conversations.
Yeah, and I think the top tip from me is always, if a conversation is awkward, it's probably the right conversation. Those awkward conversations absolutely have to happen. And if I look at relationships that have gone off-piste, it's always because there are things that are unsaid as opposed to things that are overshared and oversaid. So that's my top tip. I'm going to ask all of you to have a think, what is the thing that you wish you'd known 3 years ago that you know now?
To pass the microphone to someone else first.
I'll have a stab and give you both some thinking time. I think probably I'm not alone in the room in massively underestimating the speed and impact of AI. I think I saw it as a sort of nascent technology 3 years ago, and I thought, is it going to get there? Lawyers really going to become redundant? Are people really going to trust a machine? Is the output really going to look natural English? Yes, to all of those things. And so I think if I could give my 3-year younger self some advice, it is jump on board straight away and absolutely go with it. Worst case scenario, you've invested a bit of time and energy that's gone nowhere. Worst case scenario, you become effectively irrelevant.
Thanks, David. I think mine's slightly related, which it's AI is not the threat that I probably thought it was. That there will be winners and losers, as there always is, and those that aren't nimble enough, those that don't adopt quick enough, will probably find that they put themselves at a disadvantage. But there are great opportunities that the technology is offering us as well, and the legal industry is no exception.
I'm still thinking, but I actually think my partner works at Google, and he is a huge proponent of AI and gets very excited about it. Rightly, he's at the forefront, and you can see some of the developments that are being made that aren't. I think Imran, you said earlier about sort of lumpy adoption and that sort of thing, and Google obviously a very different beast. But how excited people are about it when they start talking about it, and I wish I'd sort of shared that excitement a little earlier. Maybe not to jump on board, or maybe I'm a lawyer after all. I need to keep a healthy dose of cynicism, reticence, and general risk aversion. But I think just being a bit more willing to listen and a bit more excited about it.
Great, thank you very much. And now I'm going to ask the audience, would you like Kerry to run up and down the room? And if you would, could you pose a question? Oh.
Hi, Osman Wahid. I'm a partner at 3 Points Law. We're a recent addition to the law firm sector, set up as a modern law firm, very technology enabled. Actually, whilst I was here, I got an email from a client with 12 bullet points from Claude on my very boring engagement letter, which is a new thing that we are seeing with AI, which is a lot more work. My question probably was more for Imran, based on your earlier presentation, which is around accountability. And it's also probably relevant, Dave, for the AI working group, clauses working group. I think there are some important clauses that should be looked at in contracts, but I think there's also an issue around reopening certain things, because then that gets to the point about accountability. And I think what we probably don't want to do, and I'd be interested in your views on this, is to sleepwalk into a situation where providers should be liable regardless of what tools they use to deliver outputs. And if we reach too far, then they'll start trying to push back on their accountability for the services that they deliver. And you had a very good matrix where you show subscription services, which are AI native and they don't take much responsibility, versus managed services where there should be more responsibility. So just interested in your views on that.
Thank you. Yeah, look, I think you've hit the nail on the head. Like the process of sourcing and contracting, and we've heard it from pretty much every speaker, involves a bilateral, sometimes more conversation. It is not about one, and should not be about one party imposing its will upon the other. And so ultimately, the process of contracting is a really useful checkpoint as to, have you as the customer got a really clear vision as to what it is that you want? And are you able to articulate that to a supplier in a way that they can understand and price? And that requires a degree of flexibility, because that means that a liability clause that you thought was appropriate might cease to be appropriate if your understanding of the service evolves during that conversation. And that's a really important part of the contracting process. However you do it, whatever tools you use, whether you do use tools, whether you don't use tools, whether you do it entirely through Claude or otherwise, you've got to find that outcome. And that's ultimately what's going to make your contract stand the test of time and ultimately be successful.
Thank you very much, guys. Thank you.